welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. US and Israel have now called their teams back from the talks that were ongoing regarding Gaza with Hamas. Both have blamed Hamas for their latest move. This comes as conditions in Gaza are deteriorating and people are dying of hunger, according to media reports. A US aid analysis have found no evidence of massive or systematic theft of US-funded aid by Hamas in Gaza, challenging claims made from Israel and the US. Meanwhile, Médecins Sans Frontières says that 25% of young children and pregnant or breastfeeding women screened at its Gaza clinics last week were all malnourished. The medical charity accused Israel of a policy of starvation, adding that severe malnutrition in children under 5 has tripled in just the last 2 weeks in the Gaza Strip. France's highest court will rule today whether to uphold an arrest warrant for Syria's former president Bashar al-Assad in connection with a 2013 chemical weapons attack. The case marks a rare attempt to hold a formal head of state accountable for alleged war crimes. Thai military continues the clash with Cambodian troops along the border, now marking a second straight day of escalating tensions. Meanwhile, US and ASEAN allies have now called for a ceasefire between them. Reports show that Iran and the E3, which includes Germany, Britain, and France, have now resumed their talks. They are in Istanbul today to discuss and resume the nuclear talks amid warnings by UN of snapback sanctions on Iran. Islamist leaders in Sudan, including the former ruling party chief Ahmad Haroun, are backing the military in hopes of a post-war political comeback. Haroun, wanted by the ICC, now hiding, has told Reuters that Sudan should embrace a model that keeps the army in politics, while a leaked document details Islamist ministry involvement. A magnitude 6.6 earthquake has struck off the southwestern coast of Samoa earlier today. According to the United States Geological Survey, the U.S. Tsunami Warning Center confirmed that there is no tsunami threat despite the quake's strength. Delegation from Iran, the European Union, and the E3 group of France, Britain, and Germany have now arrived at the Iranian consulate in Istanbul as Iran and the UN begin nuclear talks. Senior diplomats from the E3 group are set to hold talks with Iran's negotiating team for the first time since US and Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear sites in June. According to reports, European states are prepared to offer Iran an extension on a looming deadline to reimpose international sanctions if it agrees to conditions. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson has said that the meeting with E3 countries is an opportunity for them to correct their positions on Iran's nuclear issue. Iran's foreign ministry also said that talks of extending the UN resolution 2231 on Iran's nuclear program are meaningless and baseless. Now we move on to our next news. Thailand's military spokesperson has said that over 130,000 people have been evacuated amid heavy clashes with Cambodia. Fighting has been reported in at least 12 locations, with both countries exchanging artillery fire for a second straight day. Reportedly, at least 16 people, mostly Thai civilians, have been killed so far, while tens of thousands remain displaced. Here's what the Thailand's military spokesperson had to say.
Forces continue to use heavy weapons and long-range weaponry supporting fire to attack the front lines and rear areas, affecting civilians and humanitarian sites such as hospitals. Clashes have been reported in 12 areas, including Chongbok, Chong An Ma. The Ministry of Interior, through the provinces of Surin, Bonratstani, Sisaket, and Buriram, has already evacuated over 130,000 civilians, almost 100% of the local population in the affected areas.
Acting Thai Prime Minister Phuntham Pechayachai has also warned that the situation has intensified and could escalate into state of war. Both nations continue to blame each other for initiating this conflict, which erupted at a long disputed border site. Now we're joined by Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, what are the underlying causes of these current clashes between Thailand and Cambodia? And how have historical tensions contributed to this escalation?
Well, they have a historical disagreement over an overlapping territorial claim that's been unresolved pretty much since the colonial era when Cambodia was colonized by France. And this has periodically flared up over the years. This is not the first time that there's been violence and that the two militaries have engaged in gunfire. What's unusual about this particular time is the intensity of the violence, which is something we have not seen during the previous recent times that they had a flare-up of disagreement that wound up becoming a brief shooting battle. What's taking place over the past 2 days really is a significant increase in the use of force by both sides versus past incidents.
And Ross, now given the large number of evacuees and casualties, what are the long-term humanitarian and economic impacts on both of these fragile countries?
I think certainly Thailand is prepared for these kinds of situations. They have experience with disaster relief, for example, from natural disasters. They have a very large number of military personnel in Thailand, so not only could they fight the battle, but they could also assist with civilian evacuation as well. Cambodia is certainly going to be less prepared. The government of Cambodia simply doesn't have the same amount of resources, whether that's for its military or to assist civilians. They simply don't have the same amount of resources that Thailand does, which might be a factor in getting Cambodia to try and quickly to de-escalate. Although I do think Thailand is eager to de-escalate as well.
And Ross, can you tell us a little bit of background and the timing? What does this timing signal about this? Although in recent years, we didn't see this kind of situation in Cambodia and Thailand's border.
Yeah, I mean, the most recent flare-up occurred because of a series of incidents over the past few weeks involving gunfire and also involving soldiers being injured by landmines. And it just quickly escalated, it got out of hand. Now, when it first flared up, the prime minister at the time, Shinawatra, she tried to talk to Hun Sen. The call was leaked by the Cambodian side for reasons we still don't quite know. And that resulted in her being removed from office because her comments or the words she used to Hun Sen on the call seemed to be too deferential, and she even criticized her own army. And that was considered completely inappropriate for the sitting prime minister of Thailand. So Thailand has an acting prime minister at the moment. It seems that both sides have let this slide out of hand quite quickly over the last few days. But again, I think they're going to both sides are going to come under significant pressure to de-escalate.
Thank you for sharing that, Ross. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussions. Now, Philippines, the Supreme Court has blocked the impeachment trial of Vice President Sara Duterte, issuing a unanimous decision with 2 justices abstaining. The ruling is immediately executory. In a strong wording, the court asserted that the end does not justify the means and stressed that it is not the court's rule or role to favor any political outcome. The court also ruled that no new impeachment complaint may be filed until after February 6, 2026. This landmark ruling reinforces judicial independence and reaffirms the principle of law over political motives. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst. Thank you, Ross, for staying with us. Now, how significant is this news given that Duterte's previous political influence and connections?
This is a huge win for Vice President Sara Duterte. She was facing, she'd been impeached and was facing a trial in the Philippine Senate, which could result in her removal from office. And now she gets to continue in office for the remainder of their term. Their term goes to 2028, unless the House tries to impeach her again after a year, which is certainly possible. But at least in the interim, it's a huge legal and political victory for Sara Duterte. And really, we shouldn't underestimate the bad blood that now exists between Vice President Sara Duterte and President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., and also between their two camps, keeping in mind that there's national level politicians as well as local level politicians who are lining up to support one or the other, and they're both certainly very influential among their supporters. So the battle between the two of them looks set to continue for the next few years. Keeping in mind something, this is really important. In the Philippines, the president can only serve one term. So when Duterte and Marcos made a deal for her to run as the vice presidential candidate in 2022, the assumption always was that Marcos would endorse her in 2028. That's obviously not going to happen because they've had the falling out. But the important thing to keep in mind here is how much of this is really about the 2028 presidential election.
Yes, we'll keep an eye out on that. And Ross, now how could this ruling impact future political dynamics and the relationship between the judiciary, executive branches and the Philippines?
It's certainly going to result in some criticism from Marcos supporters in the Philippine Congress, in the House and the Senate. It'll be interesting to see if President Marcos directly criticizes the Supreme Court decision. I'd be surprised if he did, because he needs to maintain that image that the president is not interfering in the court. So if he does criticize the courts too directly or in strong language, there's the risk that he'll face accusations that he's trying to manipulate the judiciary. So he has to be very careful about that. But again, Marcos supporters and those who brought the impeachment in the House were eager to bring a trial in the Senate, I think those politicians, we're going to be hearing a lot from them in the coming days, and they're going to be very critical of the judiciary.
Yes, we'll keep an eye out on that. Thank you so much for joining us as always, Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joined us live from Taipei. Now we move on to our next news. The European Commission has said that a negotiated trade solution with the United States is within reach, while EU members voted to approve counter-tariffs on 93 billion euros of US goods in case the talks collapse. The 27-nation bloc's executive has repeatedly said its primary focus is on reaching a deal to avert 30% U.S. tariffs that U.S. President Donald Trump has said he will apply on August 1st. Alongside negotiations, the Commission has expressed on with plans for potential countermeasures, merging two packages of proposed tariffs of 21 billion euros and 72 billion euros into a single list and submitting this to EU members for approval. Some reports suggest that the rate would be up to 30%, designed to mirror US tariffs. Now we are joined by Peter Cardillo. He's a chief market economist at Spartan Capital Securities. Thank you for joining us, Peter. Good to see you. Now, how realistic is the European Commission's goal of reaching trade resolution, given that only few days are left for the deadline?
Well, yeah, the deadline is getting closer, and of course, there seems to be movement with the EU, and so I think that we're probably going to get some sort of a compromise. But of course, President Trump has made it quite clear that tariffs will begin at 15% and above. I don't expect the EU to be paying much above 15%, if they pay 15%. So, it's still a pretty hefty tariff imposition, and it means that, at least for now, here in the States, um, corporate America seems to be absorbing the tariffs, but I don't think that that's going to be long lasting. And so, no matter how you spin this, uh, the bottom line is that anything north of 10% will eventually show up will show up and inflation will heat up. So it's just a question of time. And,
Yes.
even with
And
India, it seems as though India is not too much concerned about the deadline. But here again, um, uh, we expect some sort of a compromise, even though perhaps India seems to be unfazed by the deadline. Now, with regards to China, um, Secretary Benson made it quite clear that the deadline is likely to be extended. Obviously, that's a very complicated situation. So you might have a deadline that's extended for China, but for the other nations, I think that deadline sticks, and it becomes somewhat of a pressing matter to come to some sort of resolution.
yes, we're hoping so, but it seems like India and US talks are now stalled. Well, we go back to our topic. How can the EU balance its efforts to negotiate a deal with its readiness to implement countermeasures without escalating the current situation?
Well, I think, the president of India seems to have a fairly good relationship with Trump. And so I think, you know, he'll probably justify it. But again, I think as we get closer, um, some sort of uh, deal will be struck. And that deal may not be as favorable as perhaps the United States would like, but I think a deal will be struck. So it's just a question of time.
And now, Peter, with the EU preparing counter-terrorists, how do you assess the likelihood of a full trade war between the US and EU?
Well, I've said this before, and I'm not going to change my thinking. Like I said, I expect the deadline to be respected and that there will be some sort of a compromise. But if it is extended, or if not necessarily extended, but if India does not um, come up with a trade deal before August 1st, and much higher tariffs are imposed on the Indian nation, it's obvious that it's not going to last. So I think the psychological factor behind the deadline is to make other nations aware that, let's say, 30 or 40% tariffs can be imposed on a nation if they go beyond the deadline. But that doesn't mean that they're going to stay there. So it's just a question of, again, you might miss the deadline and you go a week or 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, but not much more than that. No one could stand 30 or 40% tariffs. It would just, would just create a situation where the economies would just back down. And I don't think that that's the case. And certainly I don't think that's the willingness on the part of the United States. If that was the case, who would we trade with?
Yes, and Peter, now how is this news being covered in US where you are?
Can you repeat that, please?
Yes, so I asked, how is this news of EU thinking about or have decided already on the countermeasures being viewed in the in US media? How is this news covered there?
Well, I think, both nations are prepared, and like I said before, I expect some sort of an agreement. And so I think that that's not the problem. I think there's plan A, there's plan B. Certainly, I don't think it gets to plan C. So it might get to plan B, but here in the States and in India as well, I think that, that plan B would be the final plan that would strike some sort of a deal.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter Cordillo, for joining us as always and sharing your insight as a chief market economist at Spartan Capital Securities. Now we move on to our next news. A fresh controversy is brewing in Bangladesh over women's rights and free speech. Bangladesh Bank issued a dress code banning short dresses, sleeveless clothes, and leggings for women. It also suggested headscarves. Men were told to avoid jeans and chinos. After massive social media outrage, the bank withdrew the order. Critics compared the move to Taliban-style rules. Meanwhile, a new ordinance now bans government employees from protesting against state policies. Violators face dismissal with no appeal. Activists say the country is slipping into dictatorship. The government faces growing heat for attacks on personal freedom and expression. A fresh controversy is brewing in Bangladesh over women's rights and free speech. Bangladesh Bank has issued a dress code banning short dresses, sleeveless clothes, and leggings for women. It also suggested headscarves. Now we are joined by guest for this discussion, Prashant Kumar Shil. He's a political commentator joining us live from Dhaka, Bangladesh. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Can you tell us how is this news seen, or is it supported? Is this move supported by people in Bangladesh?
Yes, this is very devastating for the general people. You know that talk about the Bangladesh Bank. Bangladesh Bank is the central bank, it's the main bank of the Bangladesh, and it's the government bank. So you know that who are the qualified for this job, such as Bangladesh Bank. They're all of the qualified. They're all of the have been very competitive.
Prashant, we seem to be facing some technical issues with Prashant. We have been taking this a fresh controversy is brewing in Bangladesh over women's rights and freedom of speech. Bangladesh Bank issued a dress code banning short dresses, sleeveless clothes, and leggings for women. It also suggested headscarves. Men were told to avoid jeans and chinos. After massive social media outrage, the bank withdrew the order. Critics compared the move to Taliban-style rules. Meanwhile, a new ordinance now bans government employees from protesting against state policies. Now we move on to our next news. An $8 billion merger between Paramount Global and Skydance Media has been approved by the U.S. Federal Communications Commission. The merger between the independent film studio and one of Hollywood's oldest and most storied companies was first announced in 2024. The approval came just weeks after Paramount Global agreed to pay $16 million to settle a legal dispute with U.S. President Donald Trump over an interview it broadcasted on subsidiary CBS with former Vice President Kamala Harris. SEC head Brendan Carr, who was appointed by the president, announced the merger's approval, saying he welcomes Skydance's ideas to make significant changes at CBS. The FCC agreed to transfer broadcast licenses for 28 owned and operated CBS television stations to the new owner. While speaking on the merger, Carr said that America no longer trusts the legacy national news media to report fully, accurately, and fairly, and that it's time for a change. Skydance has also promised to end diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, something the Trump administration has targeted. This merger also comes just days after CBS, which is owned by Paramount, announced it would end the Late Show with Stephen Colbert, who has been critical of Trump. Now we move on to our next news. Wrestling legend Hulk Hogan has died at the age of 71. Clearwater, Florida police say Hogan, real name Terry Bollea, suffered cardiac arrest at his home on Thursday morning. He was taken to Morton Plant Hospital where he was pronounced dead. No foul play is suspected. Here's what Nate Burnside, Major of Clearwater Police Department, had to say.
Just before 10 a.m. today, Clearwater Fire and Rescue along with the Clearwater Police Department responded to a house in the 1000 block of El Dorado Avenue for a medical-related call. It was discovered at that time Terry Bollea, also known as Hulk Hogan, was experiencing a serious medical-related issue. Personnel provided medical treatment at that time and transported Mr. Bollea to Morton Plant Hospital, where he died at 11:17 a.m. The Clearwater Police Department is conducting a death investigation, which is standard in these types of cases. There are no signs of foul play or suspicious activity related to this call for.
Hogan was the face of professional wrestling in the 1980s and 1990s, handling the first WrestleMania and helping launch WWE into global fame. He held multiple world titles and was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2005. Beyond wrestling, Hogan became a pop culture icon, starring in TV shows, films, and reality series. In 2024, he made headlines for endorsing Donald Trump at the Republican National Convention. Now we're joined by Joshua Barnes for Reported Live. For this one, Joshua, what more can you tell us about this news?
Well, yes, absolutely, Asuma. Some very sad news coming from America, of course. Hulk Hogan, as you've mentioned, is a character who was known on screen for his wrestling with the WWE organization throughout the 80s and 90s, making his debut in 1977. He really spearheaded the WWE's resurgence and brought them to the mainstream. Of course, now the most globally recognized wrestling group and company in the world, recently signing a deal with the UFC as well, making the conglomerate a huge company, and Hulk Hogan was a massive reason for that. Extremely popular in his time in the ring through the 80s and 90s, and remained a figure in pop culture and a popular figure amongst so many. His loss is completely sad, and of course it is something that many people across the world, not just in the United States, will be taking a moment to think about and remember his legacy in the ring.
Thank you very much. That was Joshua Barnes from NewsX World. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.